taking care of yourself. What does taking care of mean to you? Just think about that a little bit more. And what does it mean to do it skillfully? And what about this notion of self? What comes up for you there? I really appreciate it when I remember to stop and reflect on something like this, because every time I do, and no matter how many times I've done it in the past, every time I do, some new insight, some new clarity emerges. And what I've found in my own experience is that the clearer I am about something, the more committed I am to it. And the more committed I am, the more courage I have to step into it. So in creating a practice, we're going to follow the intention, attention, repetition, and guidance model that we've talked about before. And I'll begin by talking about intention and reminding us, as I wrote in the email yesterday, that an intention is different from a goal. It's neither better nor worse, it's just different. And goals are about accomplishing something specific, usually in some specific period of time. And there are lots of places we can use goals skillfully in our lives. This is not one of them. This is a place when we can form an intention that is like the North Star. It's a guide. You don't have to go there. In fact, to the best of our knowledge, nobody's ever been to the North Star. But it's been a guide for human beings for longer than any of us knows, thousands of years. Intention is about how we show up. How we show up in any given situation. And we can form an intention around that. So, for instance, if we go back to how we have used the RAIN model, recognize, allow, investigate, nurture, we can pick up on recognize, and I can say that my intention is to be in a place of recognizing when suffering, when discontent, struggling is going on with me. And you remember my story about the difference between actually recognizing it and mostly being in denial about it when I had that face surgery. Often we deny our struggles, our suffering, because we don't want to feel like victims. We don't want to feel weak. We're afraid that if we recognize it, it will overwhelm us. And we want to satisfy our egos a little bit. You remember my reporting that I was saying to myself, I'm a mindfulness guy, I got this. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah. So an example of an intention is simply the recognizing. Or I might be aware of ways that I'm making my life harder. One of the ways that I make my life harder almost every single day is that I've usually identified about 10 things that are wrong by 9 o'clock, sometimes even by 8, sometimes even by 6:30. It's just, it's a habit, it's an inclination, and it leads to nothing but 90% of it leads to discontent, suffering, unpleasantness. About 10% helps me focus on a couple of things that I ought to attend to. But for the most part, the things I find that are wrong, beyond my control. So we can have an intention around the recognizing, around the awareness, around the allowing. Then the next step is where we place our attention. Where we're going to put our energy, our awareness, where we're going to engage. One way that we might place our attention around this issue of self-compassion practice is cultivating a space for being able to discern what it is that causes me to suffer and what alleviates my suffering. Discerning between the sources of suffering and what alleviates suffering. Knowing the difference. And of course, once we have discerned that difference, then we can be aware when something is causing our suffering and do something about it. And we can shift to the other side and engage in those activities that alleviate suffering. So discernment, paying attention, having that depth of awareness. This little exercise that I took us through a few moments ago of working with the phrase skillfully taking care of ourselves, that's an exercise in discernment, paying closer attention, sifting it apart, getting clarity. Can also be discerning about the presence of self-judgment with aversion, putting that negative spin on it. What's the matter with me? How did I screw this? Why did I screw this up again? And when we do that, we can discern how that contracts us, constricts us into our small selves. We all know what our small selves are. Who wants to go there? But the more aware we are of what it is that's constricting us, that puts us in this place of our small selves, then we can take our attention to alleviating it. So I want to talk a little bit about this material that I referred to in the email that Kristen Neff is working on these days and has a book coming out about that's called Fierce Compassion. You might remember that Kristen Neff is the professor of psychology at the University of Texas at Austin, who has made her life's work to do research on self-compassion and understand it and how to implement it. And what she's distinguishing between now is tender and fierce self-compassion. Tender self-compassion is soft, gentle, nurturing. It's the place where we're able to accept the reality of the 3 P's and the 4 C's. On the other hand, fierce self-compassion is about taking action. It's about finding that courage, that bravery, to take that action, to take the actions that are difficult and necessary. And in both cases, tender self-compassion, fierce self-compassion, arise from a foundation of love and support and caring, but they manifest differently. And they're both legitimate ways of exercising self-compassion. And what we want to be able to do is discern when it's time for being tender and when it's time for brave, courageous action. So I've got Kristen's book on pre-order, and it should be arriving sometime in the next couple of weeks, and I'll continue to share a few things from there. So let's move into a practice here that'll help us define for ourselves what our intentions are about self-compassion and where we want to place our attention. So beginning by settling in, following whatever simple routine or protocol you've developed for settling in, allowing, feeling the support of the surface we're sitting on. Dropping the shoulders, allowing for softening around the eyes and the mouth. Taking care of ourselves. And turning to our breathing. Allowing our attention to focus on the experience, the physical experience of breathing. The in-breath, the out-breath. Shifting away from the breath and bringing your attention to the idea of a self-compassion practice, a personal self-compassion practice, one that you devise and is customized just for you. And beginning with forming an intention. What will be your guide in your self-compassion practice? How do you intend to show up? Just listening to your innermost self for a response to this question. No analyzing required here. Simply noticing what comes up when we ask the question. How do I want to show up to enable self-compassion in my life? And now moving away from intention to the question about attention. Where do I choose to place my attention in my self-compassion practice? In my practice that's designed to skillfully take care of myself. What do I want to be aware of? Again, opening to what your innermost self, your deepest intuition is saying to you. And as we close, offering yourself a bit of kindness for your willingness to dive into these two reflections, questions, explorations around intention and attention.